Not much.
Hey, Rob, before you do that, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the February 15th Student Achievement Committee of the Whole meeting. We welcome everyone in attendance and ask everyone in the audience to silence your cell phones or electronic devices. Ms. Hughes, would you please call the roll?
Yes. Ms. Bolton?
Present.
Mr. Craig?
Here.
Ms. Jones?
Here.
Mr. Morosky? Mrs. Weinberg?
Here.
Dr. Moffitt? President Lindy?
Here. Thank you, everyone. We're excited for our meeting this evening. We have a rich and full agenda. We won't spend a ton of time on these board priorities. I just want to say in 2 minutes or less where they came from and why they matter. For the last little over a year, the board has decided, usually about 3-month intervals at a time, what the most important use of our meeting time is, and the most important issues we want to move forward over a given 3 months. And so you can see here the set of priorities that we've set for this next 3 months. All of these, I think, are among the most important things that our board and our district are trying to do this spring. And at least once a month, we'll provide an update to the public on how we're doing against where we said we wanted to be. And for anybody who'd like to look at this in more detail, you can see on the second page of the agenda more concretely what we want to be true by the 1st of May in a couple of months. So with that, I believe our first presentation this evening is going to be, and we have 5 presentations. The first one is going to be a governmental liaison report from Mr. Glover and Mr. Kearney. Do we have those folks present?
He's running 5 minutes.
Okay, so we will return to Mr. Glover and Mr. Kearney when we have them. I think we have a second presentation this evening, which is going to be on the 3rd grade reading guarantee. Oh, Mr. Kearney, delighted to have you. We had you all first tonight. Are you able to share an update with us? Do you need a couple minutes? Sure, yeah. So we'll carry on with 3rd grade reading law, and then we'll come back to our government liaison report in just a minute.
Good evening. So tonight I want to speak to the board just to provide you with an update on our 3rd grade reading update for this year. If you're aware, we had a bill, House Bill 497. This legislation was for the purpose of putting a pause on 3rd grade reading retention for the 22-23 academic year. That did not take place in time. Therefore, that bill will be reintroduced in the 135th Assembly. So we've sent out notifications in the fall to our reading specialists and our testing coordinators to that effect. So we will be moving forward with preparing our scholars for passing the 3rd grade reading assessment. And this presentation is just to cover all of the things that we plan to do to ensure that our students are promotable. So the 3rd grade reading guarantee spells out what is needed for students to promote to grade 4. As you can see, the promotable criteria here on the screen, students can promote in using a couple of assessments. They can promote either by the OST with a sub score of 685 or 47 reading score, but also students have other opportunities to promote using our iReady internal district data as well as the MAP assessment. A couple of our schools use different assessments, hence the 2 different assessments as alternatives for promotion. What we're providing and has already provided are reading improvement monitoring plans for our students who have not yet met the criteria to target their specific skill deficits. And those students also have a progress monitoring plan and will receive additional formative assessments to check that they're making progress along the way. Here's our district comparative data for the 21-22 school year and the 22-23 school year. As you can see, by the end of last year, we had a total of 46.3% of our students who were able to promote by the end of the year. Right now, we're trending at 44.4%. But what's important to note is that the criteria has increased this year from last year. Last year, the sub score for OST, the overall score for OST was 684 and the sub score was 46 with a MAP of 194. Now each of those categories have increased by 1 point. So whereas it looks like we're slightly lower, we are looking at the end of year performance for the 21-22 school year and our current performance right now for this school year, and that's taking into account a 1 point increase on all of the sub scores. Our students do have a few more assessments still yet to go this year to meet the promotable criteria. So these are our next steps to ensure that our students are able to do their personal best. Our testing department has already identified students based on this most recent data of our winter assessment who have not yet met the promotable score. All students will receive a backpack letter to take home this Friday, notifying them of their status regardless of their status. So if they have already reached the criteria or if they're still yet to meet the criteria. Those students who have still not met the criteria by May 2nd will receive the MAP assessment as well as the iReady assessment. Those are our internal benchmarks that happen at the school level, and those testing will occur by May 5th. Again, we will have our testing department disaggregate that data to see who will be remaining as needing additional support, and those students will be recommended for summer scholars. And that information will be provided to the students by May the 12th, at which point they will attend our Summer Scholars Recovery Program, which you will hear about later this evening. And those students will, again, receive support for their skill deficit, as well as additional assessment at the end of the summer testing window to make that final push to promote to 4th grade.
Thank you, Ms. Butler.
Thank you.
We have a nice chance here. Thank you for the very thorough update. Any questions from colleagues on the board? Mrs. Weinberg.
Yes, I do have a couple of questions. Thank you so much for the presentation. I know you mentioned that letters would be sent out to families alerting them. Will those letters be in different languages? Okay. And then can you explain something on the chart here where it's saying that they're utilizing, I think it's slide number 3. So for the 3rd grade reading guarantee, there's a promoter criteria of the OST, the iReady, the MAP, and then I guess there's other exemptions. Do you know which one can they use? So for example, can they just use the OST, or can you use just the iReady, or is there a combination of both? That's a little confusing.
Correct. They can use either. So with 3rd grade, they take the OST twice. So some of our 3rd graders either by OST, iReady, or MAP have already met this criteria and are identified as promotable. So it's either or.
Okay.
So if a student does not meet the OST, they still have an opportunity to promote with the MAP or the iReady.
So then with that question, going on to your next slide, on slide 4, where you are breaking it apart. And so you're saying here at the bottom, the 2022-23 by assessment. So it says that 960 students are promotable, but then there is 801 are promotable by both?
Correct. So if you read the first column, those 960 students have been promoted by their OST score.
In just the OST?
In
Correct.
just OST.
Okay.
However, 1,011 students have promoted by benchmark. And then those who, when we take those scores combined, 801 of our students have passed both.
Okay, so that I think leaves us with 1467 that are not promotable as of yet. And so they have another opportunity to take this test when?
So they will take OST in April. We have an April administration for OST. We have a May administration for iReady and MAP. Our test scores for OST come out in late May, which is why we're getting ahead of it by doing that early May administration, because we don't want to wait until the end of May to give a student a third, technically it would be a third opportunity to pass, and then they'll have a fifth opportunity if the student still has not passed. The 2 administrations in the fall, the 2 administrations in the spring, then they'll have one more opportunity in the summer at the end of summer school to promote.
And so I'm assuming that we would be updated with the data on after the school year is over, how many students were not promoted based off of this criteria.
Correct. And
Okay.
so you will get a couple of notifications. So how many students would go to summer, and then at the end of summer, how many then students would still be recommended as non-promotable.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Mrs. Weinberg. Other questions for Ms. Butler? Yeah.
Thank you for the presentation. It was really, really informative. I have a couple of questions. I did appreciate that it's going to be in multiple languages because I think that's helpful. Additionally, what is going to be an alternative for students that do not participate in Summer Scholars? Because it's looking like we've got 53.5% that are not promotable. So what if the student cannot participate in Summer Scholars, because that should be optional, what would be some of the alternatives?
I mean, of course, we're doing all that we can to make sure that the number of students who would be recommended for Summer Scholars is small. That's our first goal, is to encourage our students to do their personal best. Right now in the schools, we are, as you know, we have interventionists and reading specialists who are working with our students of greatest need. So ultimately, our goal is to make sure that, as best case scenario, that number is as small as possible. We would, we do need the students at the Summer Scholars. I would think that they wouldn't miss the opportunity to at least take the assessment, because that assessment would be required for them to promote.
So can we get a plan for those
Absolutely.
that don't have that?
Yes,
and then,
we can think through what that looks like for a student for whatever reason who's not able to attend.
And then of the percentage, well, I'm thinking, do we have a number of the 53.5% that are currently not promotable? How many of those students are students with disabilities, approximately?
I can get that breakdown for you.
Okay, thank you. Because I asked that question because they should be able to get some sort of supplemental instruction.
Oh, absolutely.
So I'm thinking if Summer Scholars is not for everybody. We're in a utopia if we think that everyone's going to participate. We would like for them to, but what other, I know that some students with disabilities have been able to receive services over the summer. So I'm looking for what number of that 53%, if they are currently not promotable, if they do not choose the summer, what would be some alternative measures to get them to successfully pass prior to the beginning of the school year? So those are questions that I'm looking for.
Okay. We do have end of year support for students with disabilities. That's through our Department of Student Services. I do believe that information is probably included in our Summer Scholars presentation. But I can look into, are you looking for more of what would also be virtual for that population as well?
I'm just thinking we have the summer scholars presentation and it's a little limited. So if we are limited in resources, what alternatives are we offering for our students to be able to pass that third grade reading, especially the students that have disabilities? So that's kind of my question in a nutshell.
Okay.
So do we have a
thank you.
plan for them? And I'm sure we do. I just was
We
wondering if
do.
we have a plan, what would it be?
We do. And some of that will be in our summer stars presentation. It's included in our end of year support for students with disabilities. And then also the link into the presentation deck here includes information on students who qualify for exemption. So some of those students might be exempt from the promotable criteria and not be necessary for them to do summer scholars or any additional learning to promote.
Was that in that not promotable number?
It's
The
in,
exemption, the ones that have exemptions or the ones that don't have to, was that in that number?
yes,
It's in the number.
I can't hear your question.
Was the students that qualify for exemptions, is that in the not promotable number?
I will verify from testing and assessment exactly how the numbers were reported and if those students are already removed.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Moffitt. Other questions for Ms. Butler on third grade reading? Ms. Bolton.
I'm sorry if I missed, and this has already been asked and answered, but what is really meant by promotable?
So based on the third grade reading guarantee, a student has to meet a certain test score to promote. So promotable would mean that you have met one of those test scores that's identified by ODE.
And that means what happens to them?
That means they go to fourth grade.
So if a child, a young student, and this is the wisdom of the state, has decreased significantly without Leader Kearney there. So what would our responsibility be then? And what status would that little third grader have in our bureaucracy here?
Based on ODE's requirement, the test scores must be met for the third grader to promote to fourth grade by those testing scores. I see the superintendent has joined us. I don't know if she wants to add anything about what we're looking to do as a district with promotion policy. Or anything to add to. The question was, what would happen to a third grader that doesn't meet the promotable score? We know that ODE, have set these standards, but what happens if a child is not able to meet the standards? Or to Dr. Moffitt's earlier question, what happens if a student isn't able to attend summer scholars?
Thank
Can you all hear me?
Hey,
Yes,
Superintendent, we can hear you great.
Do you have any
Okay,
question?
it's really, really noisy, and I don't like this background, but I didn't have time to figure out how to do a virtual background, so I wanted to try to jump in and answer a couple of the questions. Thank you, Chief Butler, for going over the information. Number one, to Dr. Moffitt's question first. The numbers that are presented right now are numbers that include all students, and the exemptions have not been removed yet. So that gives us just the information for where we are. With a snapshot from where the students are based on the assessment they took in October and where they were with mid-year. At the end of Summer Scholars, our goal is to make sure that we are communicating with all of our students and families because we really do want them to attend Summer Scholars if they have not met any of the other criteria, so that we then don't have to go to the next levels of what would be recommended for them. So that would be the first. So in terms of what the plan would be, right now we're not given a lot of leeway in terms of the third grade guarantee as it comes from the state to promote students anyway if they don't meet one of those sets of criteria that we provided. So that would be the first part of it. So the plan is to communicate with the families, to do everything possible to get the students to pass, hopefully before Summer Scholars, to give them another opportunity after the assessment for the end of the year assessment, to give them another opportunity to take I-ready assessment again, because that is another test that they can use to get them to the level of being promotable, which just means that we can promote them to the next level. And then to get them to come to Summer Scholars to do the process again. There is criteria that does allow us to look at some different nuances. And of course, students with special needs, we have to go through the regular processes with them first, but their IEP supersedes everything else. So once we get to the point of their IEP, it does become an IEP a team's decision as to whether that student ultimately promotes or not. So really, our students with special needs, their criteria is just a little bit different, even though we have to include them in the information that we have up to this point. So that's one. To Board Member Bolton's point, this criteria was the case last year. As you know, there was a lot of conversation, and even before last year, it was suspended last year. And so it started, actually the suspension started with COVID. But right now, based on the guidance that we have from the state, once we go through all of those if-then scenarios, if students have not passed, then we are not in a position to then promote them. So I think what we really have to do is look at what all of those criteria are, continue to monitor the criteria to make sure that we are getting down to as few students as possible. And then at that point, if there's something else, some other action that the board is able to take at that point, then we would have to have that discussion around what that would look like.
Thank you, Superintendent. I may have follow-ups from Ms. Bolton.
Yes, so anyone that is not going to be promotable would be what we used to call held back.
Correct.
And,
so yes, ma'am.
Okay, and of course that's why those letters that are being sent are very delicate, of course, for our families. Is this ODE requirement? Does it also pertain to our parochial or private schools as well?
So it would pertain to the parochial or private schools whose students receive state funding. So it doesn't apply to all.
Does that answer your question, Ms. Bolton?
All of our students receive state funding because they're in a public school and receiving state funding?
Well, they are our students, correct. So they receive
Right.
funding from the state. So when you ask the question about parochial or private schools, there are students that attend those schools that don't necessarily receive state funding. So it's just like, though the expectation is, now I don't do the monitoring for those schools, so I can only give it to you based on the expectation. The expectation for those schools is that students that are receiving state funding are held to the same standards in terms of state assessments as our students. So our students, yes, as a public school system, receive state funding, and the students that attend the other schools that are private or parochial that receive state funding are supposed to be held to the same standards as our students.
Okay, and and one last, if I could, just follow through, then it's possible that our kids could transfer to a parochial school? I know they've been pretty low on enrollment, so this is an interesting strategy.
That has been what.
Yeah, so I don't know that I know that answer, Board Member Bolton, to be honest with you. I mean, that's just me being honest.
The first time in 10 months that you said that. So you didn't know you've been making them up. I don't know, but this is
no,
great.
but I can't answer that one for you. but the other thing that I will add here, though, that is also important is that this was a bill that was the bill during last session was recommended for suspension. And if you recall the information that I sent to the board, I shared that in that information. Because it did not get approved through the last session, and there has not been any other action at the state level, right now we are bound to the expectations that are set forth that had not been suspended by the state. Last year, it was suspended by the state. This year, it went during open session. It was not approved or carried through during that time. Everything closed, and now we're kind of held in limbo. We do expect, at least based on what we've heard up to this point, that eventually it will be suspended, but we cannot say, and we have reason to believe that that would not happen prior to the end of the school year. So that's why we're trying to get prepared and take action right now so that we don't have students that are caught in this and we don't have any recourses for them.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Craig.
Again, I want to reiterate what everyone else has said, and thank you for providing this information. I think it's been really helpful for us to understand the situation that our students are facing. I just maybe have two questions here. One is really just kind of the comparable, or what is our district looking like in comparison to what other districts of similar size might be looking at? Because I think this might be something, again, with our larger urban school districts, to Board Member Bolton's point, that we're facing in a way that some of the other districts might not be, or some of the other private and parochial schools might not be.
While we don't have the specific data right now on how the individual schools have lined up in terms of where they are in terms of this snapshot, and having conversation with our Ohio 8 superintendents and talking to other superintendents that are not necessarily in the Ohio 8 group, their data really looks similar to what it looked prior to now. And so it's consistent, kind of pretty consistent across the board.
Okay, and then the second question is really going back to just the means in which we are trying to get them ready for these last assessments prior to the end of the year. We've had a lot of conversations, and we've done a lot of reach out to parents in efforts to get them involved and get them engaged in other things. And I just want to make sure that are we getting any feedback or return from parents or interest from those communications that are going out, or are they just started going out at this point?
No, absolutely not. Thank you for asking the question. So communication started with families back in October, right? Before October, because the first time that students could be excused from the assessment or become promotable, I should say, based on the assessment was the October administration. So after the October administration, then we really started the communication around, okay, your child has not, met the necessary requirements at this time to pass third grade. This is the support that we're going to provide for you. And these are all of the other opportunities that the child has to pass between now and the end of the school year. The second time for that was when we did the winter benchmark assessment using iReady. And so we had one group that came off with the OST that was in October. We had another group that became promotable with the iReady assessment. We know that we'll have another group that will become promotable with the OST that we take in the spring, and another group that will become promotable with the assessment that's being given to those at the end of the year that don't pass the OST for the spring. And then there's the opportunity for them to go to summer scholars as well. So we're giving as many opportunities as we can, and we are getting feedback from families.
Thank you, Mr. Craig. Ms. Jones.
Yes, I'd like to follow up. Mr. Craig asked the question regarding comparison to other districts. It might be helpful at some point down the road, after we collect more data, if we could also look at the comparisons from previous years. I would want to know where we were in COVID, where we are now. And I know that these are things that we're prioritizing, and we're working on this stuff. But just, when you see the numbers here, it's kind of scary. I mean, we want our kids to be promoted. And so I want to know that there is a trend to promote students. That is an upward trend. And that, again, we're working on that. So I don't know if that data, if we have that data or if you know that data off the top of your head.
I actually don't know the data off the top of my head. I did include, and we did include in this particular slide where we were this time last year, just as a comparison point. But we can definitely have the team pull as much information as we can, previous to last year. I'd also have to research. I know, when the third grade reading guarantee started in the other states that I've worked in. Unfortunately, in Florida, we've had probably third grade reading guarantee for about the last 10 to 15 years. It had just started in Michigan, but I would have to look back to when it started in Ohio, just to make sure that we have enough comparable data for that.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Member Jones. I think in the interest of time, I won't ask any questions. I just wanted to share some gratitude, I think, from Ms. Butler and for our superintendent. I wanted to echo Ms. Jones in terms of wanting to see the numbers move forward. I think there are any number of ways, to Ms. Bolton's point, that our state General Assembly could be more helpful to public schools and other districts. But I do think that we. I speak for myself, I share with them the desire that all of our kids be able to read on grade level. And that is an important issue for whether it's economic mobility or civil rights or social justice. I think that really matters. And I want to share my gratitude for our board in the work we did listening to the community over the fall and setting one of our 3-year goals around third grade reading. And so that as we look to the future, in all of the strategic planning work that is underway and that will be taking place in the coming weeks and months, this is one of the 5 most important student outcomes that we want to focus on over the next several years. So much important work to be done, and I want to just share my gratitude with the administration and my colleagues, I think, for prioritizing this and putting such intention and hard work behind it. So anything else from the administration on this topic, or we'll keep moving? Okay, thank you, Ms. Butler. We appreciate it. I think we might have Mr. Kearney for our government liaisons update.
Good afternoon, Mr. President and members of the CPS board, and to the superintendent. So we have a report, and it's a different format. I have listened to the input from the board members and from the superintendent. And so it begins with items of note. Then it is followed by current bills in education committees. And then it gives you news briefs. In the news briefs, if you just, on the first 2 pages, the way I've tried to design it is if you read the first sentence of each paragraph, that gives you a nugget of what's kind of happening, okay? And then the other information that is given, like from page 5 onward, is just general information that your constituents may ask you about, in which you might want to know a little bit something about, or you may have read it in other news sources or publications. So that's the new formatting. I believe that this meets the input that I have received from this body, and so if you want me to change it, I'll change it, and I'll present it in any manner that you determine. So items of note, George Glover and I had a meeting with Superintendent Wright. We discussed CPS's legislative and policy priorities, the development of a 2023 strategic plan, communications with the board, and meetings with officials in Columbus in the first quarter of 2023. Additionally, I had a discussion with Board Member Jones regarding this committee and the reporting. And then I have a recommendation that we engage on Senate Bill 1. And Senate Bill 1 is a bill to modify and change the Department of Education and to make certain changes in it. So to transfer governance of K through 12, to have workforce development and policies regarding home education and school attendance. Now, I'm not recommending either pro or con on the particular bill, but this is going to be the main vehicle that specifically President Huffman, who I think everybody here knows, is a big proponent of vouchers and charter schools. I think this is going to be one of the main vehicles to make certain changes to Ohio law, and I think that there will be others that will come out of the Senate. And so this body, I imagine, might want to offer some input or some constructive criticism in the form of a letter or testimony. Then there's approximately 5 other bills that are in the Senate, primary and secondary or education. They've changed the name to Education Committee. The House Education, or the House Primary and Secondary Committee has not yet met, although the Finance Committee, I think, met Tuesday. I think they met. So that gives you an overview of what's happening. The governor has obviously dropped the budget, and so that is the primary focus in the House. And then probably in May, it'll go over to the Senate, and then the Senate will make its changes, send it back to the House, and it'll pass in late June. So if you have any questions, or if you'd like for me to go into further detail on the report, I'm happy to.
This is, I think, a great first level. Mr. Kearney, thank you so much for being here with us. And then I think if, as board members have other questions, we could certainly go deeper.
Okay, great.
Questions or comments from board members? Ms. Jones.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Kearney. On Senate Bill 1, the current status, do we know where it is in the process in terms of the timeline? And I'm asking for a reason, which I'll share after.
Okay. Through the president, board member Jones, yes. So it's in the Senate Education Committee. Okay. It has had a 3rd hearing, and so that's the current status of the bill. Okay.
Thank you. The reason I asked that question, and to my board colleagues, I represent the district on the OSBA Southwest Regional Committee. And this came up as a topic of conversation. And one of the things that the Southwest region is working on this year under the new leadership is really trying to mobilize the districts within the Southwest region around particular issues. This particular bill is one that is overwhelmingly, where folks are overwhelmingly against. And so the conversation was, it was suggested that our districts send a resolution or letter, as you spoke to, in opposition of that. And so I'd like to put that before the board as a consideration, and possibly for action at the next business committee meeting.
Thank you, Member Jones. I think it sounds a great idea. My hunch is there's not a ton of opposition to that idea from our group, but let me just check. Is there? Because what I'm wondering is if the committee of the whole that's meeting today supports the idea, we could ask our either our lobbyists or our administration to draft something that we could vote on at our next meeting. Is that in line with what you were thinking?
I would think that our legal counsel or whoever drafts our resolutions or letters around that.
Yeah. So before we go there, just is there anybody on the group? I'm calling us a committee because we're in the committee of the whole, but this is our board. But it's the same thing. So, folks in the committee, is there anybody opposed to this idea? And Superintendent, anything on your end that would counsel against us having some kind of statement or resolution?
There is not for me.
Okay. So then can we just, Mr. Kearney, and then we'll go to Member Bolden.
Mr. President, may I advise that we work with Daniel Hoying, because he's a very good draftsman, and he will know how to produce something that is acceptable to the board.
I hear he's an excellent assistant basketball coach as well.
I haven't heard that. I'm not willing to go that far.
Yeah.
But I'll speak about his drafting skills.
Yeah.
That I feel comfortable.
Yeah, Ms. Bolden.
Yeah, I think having a resolution is a great idea, but I would also suggest that if we pass that resolution, a second effort ought to be made to reach out to the 22 other districts in Hamilton County, and we have a combined effort, because this does go across both urban and suburban and rural in opposition. So, I mean, I think it'd be great to be able to put our efforts that way. And I think coming from as many as we can within Hamilton County, I think that would have even more benefit than just us. But I think it's a great place to start with us, but expand it to the other 21 school districts here.
And any concerns with that addition from Ms. Bolton? I think it sounds like a great idea myself. Wonderful. So from then the perspective of our government liaisons and also the administration, is there any clarity you need from us on the board in terms of what's being requested for our next meeting? Great. Dr. Moffitt.
So I completely agree with Board Member Jones and Board Member Bolton. I do want to ask a question because I was contacted by senators to be about a week and a half ago. I think we had a meeting, and it was kind of like, where do you all stand? So the information has been out for some time. So in addition to everything else, I'm a little concerned with getting information timely so that we have time so that it's not rushed. Is it possible that we could have, I think we have one once a month committee, the whole meetings, but can we get legislative information, even if it's just email? I don't know how often you meet with the administration, but I do think that the board members need to get legislative information as soon as possible, if possible. And I will share with you that I got a lot of my information from African American Chamber's newsletter about a week and a half ago. So it has come out earlier. To get it a week and a half delayed from the board is just a little frustrating. So I would ask that we get some sort of information more regularly directly to the board.
Okay, to the president, or through the president, Dr. Moffitt, a couple of points. One, that this was something we discussed last year, so the concept is not new. It was introduced maybe 2.5, 3 weeks ago. So we're still in the sweet spot in terms of providing a letter or providing testimony or whatever response the district would like. And thank you for noticing the newsletter that I produced.
Yeah, I think Mrs. Weinberg you're good? Ms. Jones.
Yes. I think we all support receiving the timely information. I do want to remind, and I will say too, that as representative on OSBA, one of the things I have to do better with and have been working on this, it's not accomplished, is really trying to be more of a liaison with information. But I do want to remind board members that we get information from OSBA. If we're members, so we get information about pending legislation, and I would just encourage people to read it so that we can come a little better prepared to even address with Mr. Kearney or Mr. Glover the details of that. And I think that will help us. So I think, to your point, I think it is important to have it timely. And I think we can also do that on our own when we get that information via email from OSBA or other legislative bodies.
Thank you, Ms. Jones. Superintendent.
Yeah, so one of the things that I wanted to also add to the conversation, so we know that this is a new setup right now with Kearney and Glover and Kearney working directly with me as a part of the administration. Prior to now, for whatever period of time, they were doing the once a month reports to health and safety. And I think that everyone shared, the chair of health and safety, as well as the members on health and safety, and Mr. Kearney and Mr. Glover when we met, that there may have been a way for us to be more involved in what was happening at a faster rate. So what we talked about, I wanted to address one of the things that Mr. Kearney shared. What we talked about is, one, looking at a possible legislative agenda that we bring to the board for the board to actually determine what they're supporting, what we want to look at as a board, so that as those areas come up, we know how to be most responsive to those things. And so I do believe that that will help us even with how we're looking at the information. All of us get the reports that come from OSBA, and I get them from about 3 other sources as well, almost weekly, about what's happening. And on knowing how we're going to respond to that, I just think is really important. So having a closer working relationship with those that are working as our advocates, I think it will give us an opportunity to get in front of, in a more timely way, some of the information that some of the responses that we need to get in front of, or at least have a voice on as a board.
Thank you, Superintendent. Thank you, Mr. Kearney. Any last comments or questions before we keep moving?
Just one thing, Mr. President, if I could add. Catherine Ingram, who served on this board, is the ranking member on the Senate Education Committee. So that's good news for us. So we have somebody who's on the inside advocating for CPS.
That is very, very, very good to hear. And thank you again, I think, for all the work. I feel like it has to be an uphill fight sometimes in the world of Columbus when representing Cincinnati Public Schools. And on behalf of a grateful board, and thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So we will move right along to our third presentation for the afternoon, which is on Walnut Hills testing.
Thank you, Board President. So I'll wait for just a moment for Rob to put the slide up. This is information that we've talked about for one of the first meetings actually that I walked into was a meeting about the entrance exam for Walnut Hills. And so we wanted to give just a little more information to get some feedback from the board as well as we are looking at where we go moving forward. We are in the throes right now of the testing process. So just wanted to kind of just codify again why we use the assessment that we use and really be clear on what we're looking for in the end result in looking at students that are qualifying for Walnut Hills. Next slide. So before the Iowa test, Iowa is what we use now. Before the Iowa test, the district used a test known as Terra Nova. The test was a nationally normed test, but it hadn't been normed in recent years at the time the decision was made to switch. It was a paper pencil test only, and so there was a belief that at the time the test items were well known because it was the same assessment. It had been used for a period of time, and so therefore it caused some concern about the validity of the assessment. Also, there were not options for translated versions for the test at the time the decision was made to change. When the decision was made to change, that the district changed to a test which is really more widely known. The test is the Iowa test. It is a nationally normed assessment, and it had been normed fairly recently in terms of how the assessments are done. It is non-adaptive, which essentially means that it can be given as a paper or pencil test, or it can be given as a computerized test as well, which is really important as we think about administering the test during a Saturday session. It is also a timed assessment, and again, because we are giving the assessment on a Saturday where we're setting up additional proctors to come in for the test, it's important that we have some kind of time limit on the test, but also an opportunity to get valid data and reliable data as we're using the test. And I think the biggest area is that it is also appropriate for students who receive accommodations, for whether it's from an IEP or from a LEP plan, which are students are English language learners, or a 504 plan. That is relevant because as you are thinking about accommodations, we can only give accommodations based on what the test will allow. So if you use an assessment that does not allow you to give accommodations, then even if those accommodations are written into an IEP or a LEP or a 504, we cannot use those accommodations for the assessment. So we have to consider an assessment that does allow the accommodations that our students deserve based on their needs. Next slide. So the cut scores. So I would also like to add that the cut scores are scores that were decided on as a district. The assessment gives us an idea of where the students are based on the percentile ranking. And so that's how we got to that particular number, but that's the number that we chose as a district. So as we go through the presentation, and maybe some of you have seen already, there were some adaptations to that over the years, especially in the year of COVID, but there's an opportunity to have some conversation about the cut scores. So the cut scores that we've used all years except 2021, and that was the year right after COVID, was the 65th percentile on reading, which was the 90th percentile on the reading total for 2021, and then the 65th percentile for math, and then which was the 90th for 2021. And then the total composite, which was just adding up the numbers, essentially adding at least having the 65th percentile on both, and then any kind of additional points from there that would be at least 140 points. So that 140 points could have come from an increase in math or an increase in reading, but that was the total composite. And then for the total composite for 2021, that was reduced to 110 points. And I said 90th percentile, I'm sorry, that's the 50th percentile for 2021, that's my error. So all CPS sixth graders take the test in their home school. If students do not make the eligible score on their test in school, they can sign up to do a retake on a Saturday for the test administration. Students who are not enrolled in our district or who are not sixth graders can sign up to test on Saturdays as well. So if the student is a seventh grader or an eighth grader, they can go in on Saturday, they can sign up and go in on Saturday in order to take the test. And all students can take the test up to twice in an academic year. So if they take the test at their school site, they're not satisfied with the score that they earned, they can sign up to take the test again during a Saturday administration. Next slide. Okay, so I wanted to make sure that we added just a little bit of historical context in terms of the cut scores and the eligibility impact. So if you notice on the slide, 1819 was Terra Nova, and then every subsequent year was actually the Iowa test. The first column on in the first chart shows students that were tested in district and out of district, and the students that were eligible in district versus out of district, and then an overall summary at the end. So if you'll notice through the years, starting with the Terra Nova assessment, the students that took the test that particular year that were in district students, based on that assessment, there were 21% of our in-district students that were eligible. The next year, there were 13% of our in-district students that were eligible. The following year, there were 20%, and that's the year that there was also a change in the cut score, so the same cut score was not used that year. And then last year, there were 11% of our in-district students that were eligible, compared to the out-of-district students. So I think we see the numbers for out-of-district. For Terra Nova, it was 58%. For the first year of Iowa, 52%. The year that we changed the cut scores for during COVID, it was 74%. And then last year, it was 46%. So we can go back and look at the proportions, but for the most part, the in-district scores and the out-of-district scores, we see the differences there. And then the cut scores in terms of reduction. So when we think about where we want to go, and we can only give this data right now based on the number of students that have already tested. So I say that because as of now, we've tested 2,600 students. And so far, based on the current 65, 65, 140, 65 percentile for reading, 65 percentile for math, and overall 140, about 16% of the students that have tested, almost 17% of the students that have tested are eligible. So that's 440 students. When we look at the options for changing in the cut score, it's really what we think would be appropriate in terms of that change and what we're trying to get to in terms of eligibility. So the cut score that gets us the closest to the eligibility that we had prior to changing to this assessment is the composite score of a 120. A composite score of a 120, right? And that's looking at just the students that we've tested so far. So that could change as we test additional students. But if we look at those students that we've tested so far, if we use the composite score of a 120, the eligibility would be about 22% of the students that would be eligible for that made the cut in terms of Walnut Hills. If we reduce that to the 110 that we used the year of COVID, that number increases by a couple percent, which takes it to almost 3%, which takes it to almost 25% of the students that have already tested. The other set of information that we are looking at, and it's going to take us a little longer to pull that and disaggregate it, is we really want to also see if we are able, I don't think I was able to get it on this slide, on this presentation, but if we are able to see in terms of the students that went into Walnut Hills the year that the cut score was lowered, if we're seeing a difference in performance with those students. So that's something else for us to look at. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yeah, you're coming through great.
Okay,
Thank
great.
you.
Okay, great. So I just wanted to make sure that I review this particular slide once more, because if we're trying and really have some conversation with the board about where we're trying to get to. So if we're trying to get back to more of our in-district students being eligible for Walnut Hills and getting as close as we can to eligibility prior to changing from Terra Nova to the Iowa, then we're looking at a cut score of either 120 or 110. And when we use 110 before, we had 20% of our students, that was the year of COVID, we had 20% of the students overall that were eligible. So again, these are numbers based on just right now. Next slide. So when we look at the demographic breakdown, this is from Terra Nova, and I do applaud the team for being able to go back and locate this information at the time that I asked them for it. So I really do appreciate that to our research team. So when we look at the numbers for Terra Nova and we look at the percentages, if you go over to overall, we see the students who tested in district and out of district. And then we see students who are eligible, and all of this is broken down by our different biographic areas. So we have ethnicity, we have IEP status, we have 504 status, and we have our LEP status. In looking at this information, I know one of the areas that has come up as concern since I've been here has been the number of our Black students that are eligible for the assessment. So I did want to start with this slide because this was eligibility based on the test before we changed to the Iowa. And we see that number for our students with an IEP is at 4%. Students with a 504, it's really a little more, it's really higher than some of the other areas, and that's at 33%. And then our English language learners, students that have a LEP plan, none of those students with Terra Nova were eligible. Next slide. Then we go to 1920, and this was the first year of using the Iowa. As we look through the assessment as well, we noticed that particular year, there was a decrease in the number of, and the percentage of our Black students that were eligible. With the Terra Nova, it was 8%, and with this one, it went down to 4%. And we see that pretty consistently across across our different demographic areas. Again, this is with the higher cut score, which is the 140 cut score. Okay, next slide. And then we look at 2021. Again, 2021 was the year that we did have a slightly higher cut score, and we still see the same kind of consistency with the percentage of students that were eligible. A bit of an increase from 1920 with Black students went from 4% to 6%. Our LEP students IEP students were still declined. Our 504 students was a little higher than the year before, and then our LEP students is still relatively low. And then our last year, for 21-22, we noticed that number has continued to decline. And this goes back to now the 140 versus the 110 that we were using before. Next slide. And then this just gives in one location the demographic breakdown across each of the tests so that you're able to see them in one area, ultimately where we ended up and where we ended up with the demographic comparison by year and by test overall. So this overall number includes those that are in district and out of district. So this is overall students that are eligible. Next slide. So I think the question for me is really that I have for the board is just to get more information on ultimately where we're looking to go. I think on conversations that I've had with board members, we really want to make sure that we have as much access as possible for our students that are in the district so that they have access to go to Walnut Hills. We also want to make sure that we're paying close attention to our students, the different ethnicities within our district and the different diversities that we have in our district. So we have an amazing school in our district, and we want to make sure that the students that are going to the school and benefiting from the opportunity are students that are in our district. So that's really where I would like to get some input from the board. I don't think that it will take a different assessment for us to do that based on what we shared in the assessment. I do believe that we have the right assessment, but it might be necessary for us to talk about the cut score that we're looking at, and then how we really begin to work with students and families around preparation for the assessment. So I'll stop there. And I'm going to plug up my computer while you're getting ready to ask me questions.
Thank you, Superintendent, for the very detailed, very helpful presentation. Board members want to respond on her question of where we're looking to go? Mr. Craig.
Yeah, I think, I really appreciate the detailed information that we're getting here. I think this is a helpful way to be able to do this assessment. I know this has come up last year during our student achievement meetings. It's come up in other forums as well, in the different committees. I will say, I think one of the things at least is very stark in my mind is that we do see this change in numbers with regards to Black and Hispanic students. Regardless, even when we had the year where we dropped the standard down, we still didn't reach back up to the level in which we saw during the previous assessments. And so I think there's a lot of questions that can be asked as to whether or not that is in part because of the assessment or in part because of other factors that may be going into play. I think, again, it's fair to say that there's a lot of things with regard to stuff like COVID and things that may have affected our minority students in a way that's disproportionate. I guess my concern or my question might be, though, are we expected to see a dramatic change in the demographics by going down to this 120 mark? Because the other thing that I think we did see is that the majority of or I shouldn't say majority, but a good portion of those who are coming in as minorities are coming from outside of the district as well. And so if that factor then lends itself to less out of district students, do we see a demographic change that says that our student numbers don't necessarily go up, but the diversity within Walnut will go down?
Yeah, so thank you for the question. So as I look at each of the areas and try to dig in just a little bit, I do think one point that's also relevant is some additional data around the students that went in, and this is not, not the end all be all, but one additional data point is looking at the students that enrolled in Walnut when we use the lower cut score. So where we're digging in on our end is trying to identify how those students are performing now in the school, knowing that they went into the school with a lower cut score. And that just takes a little bit more time to do because it really is an individual question. And, there could be a lot of other factors to look at there as well. It's not just a matter of the test score being lower, but it really could be what their experience has been since they've been in the school. So I think that's one. I think the second to your point is I don't know that we know the answer to that yet in terms of the change. I would agree that in each of the assessments, which is also indicative of most standardized assessments that you take. The performance of minority students is less than the performance of non-minority students. That's almost any assessment. Not saying that it's right, that's just the way that it is. And so knowing that, we have to determine if what's the standard that we're at least trying to get back to in terms of leveling, the playing field, if you will, for the students that we're looking at, and then how we're able to proceed from there. So we really, if I was making if I'm making a recommendation and making sure that I'm being responsive to the questions that the board is asking, I think that, I would want to take a look at the action research around the lesser test score, just because, when we think about, 50th percentile, 65th percentile, 50th percentile on an assessment says that you have a pretty solid student when you start thinking about percentile ranks. 65th percentile just means the student is generally just in terms of just their performance is higher on that assessment. It doesn't necessarily mean that there's a difference in their work ethic or that there is a difference in what they're willing to put in terms of them making sure that they meet the standard of excellence in their coursework.
And then second question, and I think this probably is going to be a fairly easy one to answer, or a fairly quick one to answer, is just, I think the other question becomes, as we increase the number of students who are eligible, that doesn't mean we've increased the size of the school itself. And so at some point, and I think, some would argue that we are pretty close, if not already there. We're at a space capacity of what can fit inside of Walnut. And so I think the other thought in my head is again, thinking about what are the other options and how we are communicating those other options for the students who are going through and taking the IOSS and maybe falling just short or maybe on that borderline. How are we communicating all those options to them early enough for them to be able to take advantage of the other schools in our district that have great programming that again, I think this has been a constant conversation we're working on, is how do we communicate those programs at other schools so that we're not just trying to get to 700 students who are eligible to go to Walnut, because there's not going to be a space for a 1,000 student class thrown into Walnuts.
Correct. And I think the other thing that I've heard recently from some parents that have engaged with me around, what happens to them if they don't get accepted into Walnut. They're currently parents in our district. And I think that we look at the data and we see that we have a population. That's a bit of data that I'll actually have the team pull and share with you as well, that I've looked at so that I can share with you as well. I'm sorry. We lose, while we bring students back to the district or bring students into the district that then go to Walnut, we lose a lot of our students that have been with us in the district up through 6th grade if they don't get into Walnut. And so it's a different question that we're asking at this point. And I think that there are a couple different schools of thought on it. That's why it's so important to get the feedback from the board as we're looking at what the recommendations are. I do know that one of the responses to it as well is, this particular group of parents that I was speaking with around this is, we're looking at programming as we begin to move forward. We've done the audit, we see where there are some gaps, but I think that there could be an opportunity even this year in some of our school buildings, if we looked at some program expansion, thinking along the lines of those parents that don't necessarily get into Walnut, but they're in our district and we don't want to lose them for the district. What is the right programming for them?
Thank you, Mr. Craig. Thank you, Superintendent. Other board members, Mrs. Weinberg.
Yeah, I just wanted to kind of go off of Vice President Craig. Thank you, Superintendent, for presenting the information to us. I really appreciated being able to kind of see the breakdown of the demographics. And my colleague brought up a really good point about if we reduce the test scores, and let's say we reduced it to the 110, and then you had the new eligible number of 648. That was going to be my same question in terms of capacity in the building. Now, I do have a question with the number that you gave, where you say eligible. Are those the actual students attending or just eligible?
Right. So no students have been assigned yet. Those would be students that would be eligible based on the assessment.
Right, but if you go back into your other data points, the actual numbers that you have given us, are those actual students that are at the school or just eligible?
Those are students that are eligible based on the test.
Do we have the data in which it shows us the breakdown of the actual students who attended the school as well?
So we can pull data for enrollment for each of the years. I think that's what you're asking for just those grade levels.
Say the last part.
Are you looking for enrollment for just the grade levels that would have been new students for that year?
Yes, so for each of the years, how you have the breakdown of 2018 to 2019, and I think it has here that we had the 2,604 students tested, but only 551 were eligible. How many of those eligible students actually attended the school?
Yeah, so we'll have to do a little more digging on that to get the number for you, and that breakdown crosses grade levels as well.
Perfect. And I also agree with a point that you made earlier, stating about the 1 year that we had to lower the scores. It would be great to see, I think those students would be 8th graders now, to see the progress of how they're doing academically. I totally agree with that and would look forward to getting that data as well. So thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Mrs. Weinberg. Ms. Bolton.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the specificity of this. First and foremost, the district has to have a successful and inclusive Walnut Hills as part of the health of the district and keeping the families that we need to keep and the tradition. I've lived through when it's exclusive, super exclusive. I can go back 5 superintendents fighting with them fighting the same battle of widening the culture. And I think it's very, very important that the cut score is something that allows anywhere, I don't know, I'm not as gifted in this data stuff, but anywhere, 1 out of 5, or thereabouts, somewhat of whatever looks sweet. The other piece of this is that this is such a bad reflection on our district. From the standpoint, if I recall, last year or the year before, almost none of our neighborhood kids qualified on this test. That is a really bad comment. The other thing I'd like to make sure is that we do need more space. I would hate that no space at the end would keep a kid from a life-changing opportunity at this kind of additional knowledge or this tradition or whatever. So we will need that space. And I think it's great. It's also a bad reflection on us that we still have not been able to communicate to our community that there are other options that may be actually more relevant for their kids than Walnut. But for generation after generation after generation, with some exception regarding Montessori and the performing arts, if you will, this has been the only choice for some people. And that's not right, but it is what it is. So I would hope that, I have misgivings, but we'll defer to you, of course, on the Iowa piece. I just feel there has to be something inherently discriminatory about it. But that's just me. You know me, I don't like the assessments anyway. But at any rate, I would hope that we would do a cut score using Iowa that would allow Walnut to continue its trend until most recently of trending to inclusion instead of necessarily elitism. And the cynics in the community felt that when we played with some of this and we changed tests, the cynics in the community said, you're doing it because you don't want to build more building. That's what they thought. And we had to say, oh no, it's not what we're doing. Or that we were doing this to go back to where there was greater exclusivity. So I trust you all to come up with the right cut score that will serve our folks, but there has to be a cut score that serves our families and our students. And Walnut, because Walnut is a better place the more inclusive it is.
Thank you, Ms. Bolton. Is there a question you'd like to ask too?
No,
No question.
no.
No problem.
No,
Other-
and let me take personal privilege. I have had to compete against Walnut my entire professional life at Wyoming High School and at a new high school called Aiken. And I just want to make sure people understand I value their standard. However, they can grow too.
I think, thank you,
Only
Ms.
when it's
Bolton.
not.
Thank you. One nice feature of our board, I think, is that we have a nice mix of
we
backgrounds
do.
in terms of like a critical mass of Walnut folks and also Hughes and Aiken and a Catholic school. So we have some real diversity, I think, amongst our board.
God bless them all.
Other board member comments on the presentation? Dr. Moffitt.
I'm feeling some type of way a little bit from the defense coming from over here as board member Bolton drops the mic on that. But I do want to, because I had a student who was accepted into Walnut Hills but did not attend and chose to attend Withrow, and actually loved that experience. So my questions tend to be more qualitative in that I believe there are students who, while I think my son is special, he may not be unique in that there are students who qualify to get in but choose not to attend for a variety of reasons. I would look for that number of students that qualified but don't attend. So qualification versus attendance, or eligibility in this table versus attendance. I do think that the cut score is from an academic perspective, I'm happy to defer that, but I also would really love to see some survey of the current administration on what they are seeing with the students that are coming into into Walnut Hills, because they're in the trenches, so they know over time what they have witnessed with regard to the type of student, the quality of rigor that they're bringing in, even with the decreased score. They can tell us over time what they've seen. So I would really love to get a survey of that building's culture, and what they think about varying that. I think that there's one thing to look at the data, but I also think that I would be interested in just qualitative data on what their experience has been over time. I'm a little standardized tests are inherently bias, period. So it doesn't matter to me which one you use. So I don't think that I don't want to argue turning over Iowa, because I think that no matter what we use, it's not going to necessarily be the best measurement of academic success for our Black, Brown, or even our non-Black, Brown students, to be quite honest with you. It doesn't measure potential. But I am particularly interested in the data of the students where we did cut that score. So as Board Member Weinberg and I talked about prior to, the students that are current 7th graders, current 8th graders, and maybe even current 9th graders, to look at their data. Where are they? Because they came in with a reduced number. Where are they academically? And I don't know if it's a measurement of current GPA or just average score if they don't happen to have a GPA measurement. But I do think that data will show us a significant piece of where they were deficient, where they may have come in from the score, but where they may have had some areas that we can work on. Even though they got into Walnut Hills, where is it that we can look at some improvements? And then I would even love to see, because I'm kind of a data person, I would love to see of that particular group of students that came in with a reduced cut score, do we see the students that test, are they showing the same deficiencies? So that to me would look at the potential, a forecast of what we could see. So I guess what I'm saying is if the current 7th and 8th grade, 7th, 8th and 9th graders are demonstrating a deficiency in, let's say, math, on an average, a group of students where their math score is low, I think we could maybe make some assumptions or some predications that is going to be applicable because of COVID or because of, I don't know what those would be, but I just would love to see us do some forecasting prior to us actually making some definitive results. That's just me personally, because I think we have a data set to get data from of students where we cut the score and they're in there. So we have that group that can give us a pretty representative sample of what to predict on a cut score moving forward. And I guess just to summarize, I'd love some qualitative data from the administration over time. What did they see with the current high school students versus the current junior high school students, junior high meaning 7th, 8th, and 9th graders? And then again, qualified versus attended, eligible versus actual attend. Because when we had an opportunity to visit some of the schools, they would say, oh, 3 of our students went to Walnut Hills. And my question would be, how many took the test and were eligible? Oh, well, 15 of them were eligible, only 3 went. That's a whole different number than it is. And if we're looking at the students that actually attended Walnut Hills, when you talk about neighborhood schools, maybe none of the neighborhood students wanted to go, but they were eligible to go. They actually tested into going, and I don't know. But I think that we need to look at the data a little bit deeper.
Thank you, Dr. Moffitt. You have gone already, Ms. Jones, or not?
I haven't gone.
You should go now.
Okay, I'll be brief. I don't know that I have a strong opinion about the cut score yet, and welcome any data that helps me with that. I have always struggled. Well, let me back up first and say I do agree with Ms. Bolton's comment about widening the culture. And I absolutely struggle with the fact that our neighborhood schools in the 6th grade aren't eligible, for whatever reason, aren't eligible to go to Walnut. And I do, when we talk about widening the culture, especially given the work that's being done now on ad hoc and recommendations that may come out of that, I would hope that we again would look at how we build capacity in the system already. And we talked about it, so this is not new, so that our parents and our students have viable options that equal Walnut. And building the culture around that means that they feel just as good going to another school, which has a rigorous curriculum, whatever, as they would with Walnut. Now, having said that, the one thing I have always struggled with since I've been on this board, and I struggled with it when I was on policy committee, and I still struggle with it, is our enrollment policy around out of district versus in district. And I think we need to look at that at some point when we're ready, when things are ready, we need to look at that. I don't remember off the top of my head what the actual policy is for out of district students, you know, how they apply or whatever. I believe, and I know people don't email me, people are going to email me when I say this, and it's okay. But, you know, we are an in-district school. I mean, we are Cincinnati Public, and I want to see Cincinnati Public Schools be able to attend Walnut Hills High School if they meet the criteria. So, having said that, I'm done.
Thank you, Board Member Jones. I will share just a couple quick things. I think, first of all, I wanted to thank the superintendent and the administration for the presentation. And I specifically want to notice a pattern across several presentations over the last year. And I think my colleagues will have heard me say this before. But one of the things I deeply appreciate is that we are looking in detail at the things that are hard. And I think we've seen that in the way that we're looking at academic data that's not where we want it to be, or the nuts and bolts of how the budget works. We saw this in the 3rd grade reading presentation this afternoon. We saw it in the teacher hiring presentation that we looked at last time. There's just, I think, a consistent commitment to facing the facts, but keeping the faith about our ability to do something about those facts. And I think that matters a great deal, and I wanted to acknowledge that and say thank you. When the superintendent asked, you know, where are we as a board looking to go? As one board member, I would just share that I agree with the 2 priorities you shared, that we want to increase access to Walnut within the district, and we want to strengthen the diversity, and I'll use Ms. Bolton's inclusion language for Walnut Hills. From my perspective, both of those things feel very important. I think the 2 thoughts I wanted to share, and this could be things that we do not need to discuss these this afternoon. But I think to Member Jones's point about open enrollment, I shared this a couple years ago when I was on policy committee. I feel strongly that we should only take students from other districts if they take ours. There's an asymmetry that exists sometimes where we will let their students enroll at Walnut, but they won't let our elementary school students from other neighborhood schools enroll in their elementary schools. And that seems off to me. So we can settle that. We figure this out another night, but revisiting this is something that I would be interested in. I think the last couple thoughts, it's come up in a couple different contexts recently, whether there's an alternative to a test-only entrance criterion. And could there be an admissions policy for Walnut that is more capacious than just one score on one test? I don't know, but it was an interesting idea and something that I'd be interested in hearing about at some future point. And then lastly, to the pattern of parents leaving CPS if their students don't get into Walnut, I think that's real. And I was reading some interesting polling data recently about just changes in this next generation about overall interest in college, given its cost, given the return on the investment, given the economy. And it's just a wondering, is there an opportunity with what this next generation is prioritizing to create some non-Walnut options within CPS that speak to workforce credentials or early college associate's degrees? I think that I'm not sure, but there could be an opportunity, I think, to think creatively. So thank you for the very in-depth presentation. And I want to echo my agreement with the two criteria that you mentioned earlier. I think Vice President Craig had a comment too.
Just a quick question, and I think it also provides a little clarity for our thinking about this as well. Part of what we talked about is just the general assessment score, but I recognize that for a lot of students in our district, the math score in particular is where we see the greatest level of deficiency in their ability to be eligible for Walnut. And I think that may be something for us to also think about as to whether or not it is a across-the-board change in the score or whether or not it is particularly disaggregating both of those together. Because I do think that math score, to the point of Dr. Moffitt, when we look at the qualitative results, the math area is the area where we're seeing the struggles as they move up through the classes. And so we've got a great student who's doing well in every class but math that tells us we need to do something more in the front end, that tells us we need to do something more before they get there. And so I believe that's correct. And I guess, Superintendent, that the math score is where we're seeing the greatest level of deficiency in the scores.
That's correct.
Well, thank you, board members. Thank you, Superintendent. It is almost 5:30. I'd like to see if we can do everything we can to end by 6. And we have 2 great and important topics left. We'll transition next to summer school.
Okay, so as we get ready to review where we are currently with summer school, we'll give just a minute for the presentation to get up. So the summer school information in terms of or summer scholars, I should say, really was to kind of share high level where we're looking to go and recommendations that we're looking to make going into this particular school year. But next slide, this particular summer. So I wanted to start here by looking at where we were last year and information for what we're proposing that we do or what we're looking at doing next for this year. A lot of conversations around summer school and having, had the experience of being responsible for summer school for a long time. It is one of those areas that it does call for a lot of conversation because there are some that really strongly believe in the importance of having a traditional kind of summer program that's academically focused. There are others that would prefer something that's more enrichment. There's some that really are not necessarily wanting a summer program, but what they're really wanting is an extended school year. And sometimes that makes it more challenging as well, because right now our students are not required to attend summer scholars. So for last summer, Just to compare the two, last summer it was every school hosted summer school. It was pre-K through 12. The enrichment was all grades. It was a varied mix in terms of those that provided enrichment services, and that was at about $550 per student. The teacher ratios were about 1 to 15, 1 to 18. We did do leveling so that you would not have so many individuals in classes with 1 or 2 students. And that did also allow us to be more fiscally sound. We had paras in the building as well. We followed the academic guidelines and had an operational para. We do offer lunch during the summer, so it's important that our students have, there's some oversight with our students in terms of summer school. And for our interventionists, for our special needs population DSS, we follow the academic guidelines. And so the breakdown for that I share as a part of the staffing model for the school year. The start and end times varied by school. So whatever time the schools wanted to start and whatever time they wanted to end, that's what they did. And then we had to figure out transportation around the start and end times of what the schools gave. For this year, we're recommending going back to something that was a little more consistent in the previous years, which you'll see on coming slides, or if you've reviewed the information already, you'll see it on the previous information. Going back to designated host sites so that we're not looking at 65 schools across the district, but we're looking at 19 or 20 schools across the district. There was some pretty strong feedback about the earlier grades, and so focusing on the 2nd through 12th grade space, where we would be looking at for 2nd through 3rd grade, really looking more at remediation, both remediation and enrichment for our 4th through 6th grade students, and then for our high school students, looking at more course recovery for them. For enrichment, still offering enrichment. So if our students are involved in the summer, if they're in up through 8th grade, they would receive enrichment in the afternoon, so that we would still have the academics for them in the morning and the enrichment for them in the afternoon. Teaching ratios would follow our academic year guidelines as well. One of the reasons for this is because, quite frankly, as we see in our data and as we know from visiting schools, we have a lot of students that sign up for summer school that never actually come to summer school. So if we start with a higher ratio for what those numbers are, then it would hopefully allow us to keep all of the teachers that we hire for summer versus having to level after summer school starts. So if you start with a higher ratio, you're more likely to end around that 15 to 18 student population, and then that will allow us to keep more students. So really still trying to focus on the smaller class sizes around 15 to 18, but starting with the larger numbers, expecting that we will likely not see all of the students attend that generally sign up. Doing our paras for our 2nd through 6th grade students and still having an operational para. No change with interventionists for DSS because we follow the academic guidelines, and start times would be consistent by the type of school. And so that's our schools that are serving our 2nd through 8th grade students if it's a K-8 building already, or our high schools that would be 7 through 12. Next slide. So I wanted to make sure that we had some historical context of what summer school has looked like in our district. So prior to 2021, summer school was not offered widespread in the district. For the 2018 year, there was a buddy school plan. It was offered K through 12th grade, but for our high school students, it was recovery. For our K through 8th grade students, it was based on students being invited based on where they were performing in school. So it was not open to all students across the district. It was open to specific students that received invitations based on whatever the guidelines were for that particular year. That was in 2018 and 2019. In the summer of 2020, which would have been at the onset of COVID, it was just for credit recovery for our 9th through 12th grade students. And then 2021 is where we begin to open across the board to our pre-K through 12 students. And it was open at all of our sites. the schools determine what their programming would look like, and there was some support from the district in terms of curriculum and what the curriculum looked like. And then last year, more of the same. It was open last year. There was an increase last year in enrichment as well. And then you also see the cost per student, what that cost looked like in terms of where we were for each of the years. I will note, and I think that Kim is in the room, so she may be able to speak to this if a question comes up. But for summer, the numbers that we have in terms of expenditures give the overall numbers, but we also know that because it covers 2 academic years, some of the expenditures are paid for in 1 year, and the rest of the expenditures are paid for in another year. Next slide. So the purpose of Summer Scholars, provide additional time to really focus on keeping students on track with graduation and promotion. As students are included in Summer Scholars, we want to make sure that there is an SEL component as well as content knowledge and skill-specific work and enrichment for students that are attending. For the program success right now is measured by the opportunity to decrease the summer slide, and that's actually spring to fall comparison. And so when we think about the data, really drilling into where the students performed in the spring, so that would be on their assessment in the spring, whatever assessment that is, compared to where they performed in the fall. One of the reasons that we think about that is summer school is a finite number of days. And so there's a lot of different schools of thought around whether you use an assessment at the end and you use the same assessment at the end to see if there's any growth during that time. You know, when you go really begin to dig deep into that area, the amount of improvement that you would expect to see during a 16, 17, or 18-day summer school program, I don't know if you necessarily see that by a specific assessment. So that's up for additional conversation. Right now, we're looking at measuring that improvement based on where the students were in the spring as compared to where the students are in the fall, to keep from taking an additional day during the summer for them to spend a day just doing testing. And the last, which there was some survey data done with students last summer around culture and how students felt, but some kind of comparisons in terms of panorama for students to take as well to determine where they were or how they felt at the beginning of summer versus if there was a change at the end. Next slide. Key components of summer school. So we know the dates are already determined. The 19th is a holiday. And so we started at the beginning with teachers on the 2nd. It gives teachers a time to open summer school and to close summer school, because a part of summer scholars for a lot of our students is for them to get a grade as we think about recovery. So building in time for teachers to prepare and have some level of planning time, as well as an opportunity for there to be grading. For the actual day, elementary 8 to 2:30 and our secondary 9 to 3. And that means that if we have students that are in a K-8 building, their time would be from 8 to 2:30. I'm sorry, if we have 7th and 8th grade students that are in a K-8 building, their time would be from 8 to 2:30. And our 7th and 8th grade students that are in a high school building, their time would be from 9 to 3. Designated host sites, which are on an upcoming slide, and to have an intensive focus on our 2nd through 12th grade students. For our pre-K through 1st grade students, we are doing some partnership work with our city libraries. They have quite a bit of programming that they do for students as well. So not only will we offer online a summer work packets for all grades, we will, or for all grade levels, especially our pre-K through 1st grade students, will also encourage them to participate in the programs that are being offered at the library as well. Next slide. This is just an overview of what the academic day would look like, or what the summer daily schedule would look like, with the enrichment in the afternoon and our 2nd through 8th grade spaces. For our 9th through 12th grade students, looking at their programming would be around recovery. So really assigning them during the day to courses and being on campus only for courses that they need to take. And so we would really work with schools, if a student only needs to take 2 graduation required courses that they need to recover, really trying to give them an opportunity to do those courses in the morning, so that if they're done with those courses after they have lunch, they can leave the second part of the day. So not keeping them throughout the day, only having them focus on the classes they need. By the same token, if the classes are scheduled in the afternoon, then that means they could come in for lunch, and then in the afternoon they would have those recovery courses. Next slide. So just some specifics on our core programming, and this is just a bit of information for you. We will provide transportation for our students when we, on the summer school application, families would identify for our 7th and 8th grade students if they want to ride the yellow bus or if they want to ride the metro. All of our students that will go to summer school, we will have to assign them to their summer school site, so they will have to be assigned transportation for the summer as well. For our 3rd grade students, this is the only group that it would be required for them to attend. And I say required, which means that we will do everything in our power to get 3rd grade students that do not attend, that have not passed or made the promotable criteria, for them to attend summer school, summer scholars, so that they are able to meet that expectation before the end of the school year. Next slide. And enrichment overview, so we will launch an RFP that really covers the major areas that we had for summer enrichment for last year. So STEM covers almost everything: science, technology, engineering, and math, the arts, and recreation. As individuals are applying for the enrichment opportunities, they would apply for a 2-hour program or a 1-hour program in rotation, and then the pay for them would be based on their number of students and their number of days. So as we think about the budgeting, it allows us to budget so that we are just being more equitable with how we think about budgeting in those services. Locations can serve more than one site. So when they do the RFP, they would share whether or not they want to do more than one site and what their availability is. So they can go anywhere from 1 day a week up to 5 days a week at the sites that we've identified. Next slide. Staffing, 2nd through 12th grade, for our teachers, we would follow our same academic year ratios, and that's for the purpose of scheduling. Our goal, of course, is to not have to have the discontinuity once the summer starts, but to look at where we are really by about that 3rd day of summer school, and then if we have to do any leveling, do it at that point, and not have to continue leveling throughout the summer. Teachers, if they are teaching the maximum 7 hours a day, they do have a 45-minute planning time, as well as they have lunch time as well if they are teaching for 3 or more hours. And then our pairs, I've already shared the information for pairs as well. We do have additional staffing that include counselors for our high schools, social workers, security, and nursing support. Next slide. So we looked at a variety of things in terms of designating the host sites, and the host sites, we started with sites that are having any kind of major maintenance that's at their school during the summer or that will be at their school during the summer. We also looked at any specific programs for ESY, if there were certain schools that had to have that we serve a population of students that moving them to another location would be difficult to do, like Roseland Common, for example, and what our needs are for ESY. And then of course, geographical proximity. We also looked at past enrollment trends. So for each of the school sites, we looked at how many students they had that were in attendance during last year's summer school, so that as we were looking at trying to plan for what we think about this year, we didn't over plan for the number of students based on the size of the school. And the important thing is there are not any of the schools based on currently what we believe the projected data to be that would be at capacity for the summer. And the comparison of students attending their regular school versus another site and what we needed in terms of transportation. Next slide. So our host site structure, I think, is pretty clear. You have a host site that principal and their team are primarily responsible for summer school. Principals from the other schools would go to that school for designated periods of time to offer assistance in the summer school site, and then staff from the other schools would go to the host site to offer assistance with summer school throughout the summer school timeline. The goal here collectively would be that we ultimately share the wealth for summer school. So if you're a host site this year, unless there is an extenuating situation, like I would think, like the reference I used earlier for Rose and Condon, then another school would be the host site for next year, and then you would, go there and share the opportunity with them. Next slide. Just an overview of the host sites, just to give you some ideas about where the host sites are. Our Lighthouse site will host their own students as needed. We don't have as many students that attend during the summer at Lighthouse. We know we have small numbers of students at Lighthouse anyway, and fewer of them attend during the summer. And for students that would prefer to do an online opportunity, they would be able to do that through CBA. Any of our 9th through 12th grade students that would like to attend virtually using for a course recovery, they could do that through CBA. Next slide. So this just gives some milestones about where we are. We're having the conversation today, and we'll do one more conversation with principals tomorrow. And then on Friday, the goal would be to open the application for summer school. And at that time, the application for students and their families, as well as the application process would start next week for teachers. Next slide. Thank you. Now open up for your questions.
Thank you very much, Superintendent. Comments or questions from board members? Ms. Jones, followed by Mrs. Weinberg.
One quick comment, very short. All the while you were doing the presentation, I'm thinking, is there a virtual option? And it's there. So thank you for that. I think that's very important, especially for high schoolers who want to work. So thanks. That's all.
Thank you, Member Jones. Member Weinberg.
I was just going to say thank you so much, Superintendent Wright, for sharing this with us. I really like the idea of the host sites. I think that's going to be very helpful for our students. And thank you for considering that and really putting that into play. I did have a question, but Board Member Jones, you already emphasized on the virtual option. I was going to ask about that, so never mind. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Weinberg. Ms. Bolton.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's vastly improved from last year. Do we have any amount of money that we're thinking about, what this is going to cost us yet?
So why did I know you would be the one to ask me that question? So the answer to that is yes. In terms of thinking about our budget, we're working in partnership. We have been in the entire time working in partnership with the Treasurer's office in terms of preparation for it. And what I will share is that we do believe, based on where we are currently and what we're proposing in terms of the sites, that we would see a dramatic decrease from where we were last year and a decrease in where we were in previous years. So it looks like prior to year before last, we vacillated between $5 and $7 million for the summer. And we do anticipate right now, with looking at the reduced number of sites alone, that we would come under that 7 million number. So we have it worked up. I don't want to give you that number just off the cuff. We have that worked up based on school, based on the number of teachers, and we can share that as we proceed in terms of whether or not we're going to keep the sites that we have.
Thank you. And the only other question I have is, of course, about the partners and the enhancement or enrichment. Does that money go directly to the people that are the partners, or is that money controlled? And I think some principals do this, where the money's going and to the school, so to speak, and then they can be watching whether or not the partners are delivering. I mean, how does that work?
So last year, the money actually went to the partners.
Okay.
So as we think about the setup for it, it went to the partners. This year, it would be the same way. The difference is we're starting on the front end with being a little more frugal about how we think about what the partners are doing. I mean, when we think about, $20 per day per child versus that flat $550 rate, there's just a vast difference there. The other thing that is also an option, and some schools have talked about this, is after we we don't think that we'll have any issue at all with the RFP in terms of getting enough partners. We sent information out to partners about 3 weeks ago to let them know that an RFP would be forthcoming and that they would be, eligible to apply for the RFP, but we wanted them to know that there would be changes moving into this year so that they would be prepared for that. But if there is a situation where there is a school that we don't have coverage for, then we do have additional staff within the district that have looked at or that would consider offering enrichment in those schools as well. So in that case, we would be paying them their hourly rate versus the $20 per student per day.
Does a student have to do the academic morning in order to do the enhancement?
As long as they don't need transportation. So we're only doing transportation one time a day. So we will bring them in the morning, we will take them in the afternoon. If they are a walker or if their parent picks them up, then they would not have to stay the entire day. If they do the enrichment, however, yes, they do have to do the academic.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Bolden. Other board members, comments or questions? Dr. Moffitt.
We always seem to start last on this side. We might want to switch that up a little bit. I'm feeling some type of way. So I just am concerned. I think I've asked you most of my questions online. I kind of wanted to understand a little bit of the justification behind some of the things that you put in the slide, and you were able to provide that. So thank you so much for that and for the presentation. I just really am concerned about turning students away if they want to go to summer school. I was the type of kid that had to go to summer school because my mama made me, not because I needed to go. So we do have students who may be on track and may not be invited to go, but could benefit from being able to utilize summer learning and summer enrichment. So that would be a concern that I have, is that, and I hope that we could track that, how many students don't need to be there because they weren't invited per se, but would like to come, because I think that number may be significant. Whether parents use it for babysitting or whatever the reason, we need to also, I would love to be able to track that data. And then we said last year, according to your email last year in June, enrichment was lowly attended. And so is it, what would be the barometer for enrichment? That is, how are you going to do enrichment? Are the students allowed to, some of the benefit of having enrichment selected by school is that they get the chance to have an extension of the providers that already know their culture and already know their school. So if we have new providers, and let's say an enrichment activity is not very well attended, what would be the plan to pivot? If maybe are students going to choose those, or is the school choosing that? How does that work? And what is the plan to pivot if our numbers are low? I do know that last year, I think right into the second week of programming for the summer, we surplused 110 staff. So what is the plan to prepare for that shift on enrichment and or staff and or students?
Okay, thank you. So to start with the first question, I shared that our focus for second and third grade would be students that would be invited, and that was intentional because the goal for second and third grade students, thinking about the third grade guarantee, is to give the option for us to have some deeper time and more focused time with students that are not on target. So in the second and third grade space, it would be limited to students that were required to attend. For fourth through eighth grade space, it would be open to students that wanted to attend, with an increased focus for seventh and eighth grade students that had not been successful in their English class or their math class for the seventh and eighth grade year. But there is some opportunity for other students to attend as well. And then for high school students, just looking at all of the feedback, even feedback from the high school students themselves, really doubling down in the space of recovery. Several of them talked about I don't like having to be there all day if I don't have to be. during the summer. I think as we move into next year, one of my goals would be, if we consistently offer summer as an opportunity, will also be some kind of acceleration, dual enrollment, CCP coursework that we may be able to offer for high school students as well. But this year, that takes a little more planning with the university. So this year, it would really just be focused on those 9th through 12th grade students. So that just gave some background as to why we selected and selected the way that we did. And then looking at the feedback, which I did share with the board, and I actually shared all of the responses. They're kind of vastly all over the place. So we had to kind of take that information and make the best recommendations that based on the work that we need to do there. So that was the first. The second, in terms of the surplus of teachers, our goal is to start with the higher numbers for the summer. So that's why we moved away from looking at the smaller numbers that were used last year, that 12 to 15 number that were used last year, that allowed us to build the allocation, but starting with the larger number, the same numbers that we used during the regular school year, and then recognizing that we will likely decrease in those numbers. And that's just indicative of anywhere that you are in terms of the summer. So if we start with the larger numbers, anticipating what generally happens in any summer experience, reducing, then it offers us the opportunity not to have to level as much after that third day. So the goal would really be not to have to level. And when I say level, not to have to let teachers go after the third day. The reason that we did that before is we had some situations where we had teachers with no students. So if we think about the number of teachers that we had and the number of students that we were serving, it just was not fiscally responsible for us to keep the teachers, and we didn't have the students for them to serve. So that would be the response to the question about the teachers. In terms of enrichment, last year students could leave after the morning. So once they came for the academic portion, they then could catch the bus and go home in the afternoon. So we are removing that for students that ride the bus, and the majority of our students that attend our Summer Scholars programs ride the bus. So we believe that alone is going to increase the number of options and opportunities that are available for students in the afternoon. The other thing that's also important, and thank you for raising this, Dr. Moffitt, because I neglected to share this. The only individuals at this point that would be eligible to apply for the RFP for the summer are our current partners. So you have to be a partner in a school already to even apply for the RFP. The reason that that's important is because as those partners apply, we looked at one time and opening it all up and sending students all over the district based on where they lived and not really looking at where they went to school. And so we backed off on that one this year to look at pairing them together with host sites. The advantage of that is it still gives us an opportunity to pair partners with schools that they are currently serving during the school year.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Dr. Moffitt. Thank you, Superintendent. Any other last, I do not have any questions myself. Any other last questions on summer school, summer scholars? So for my colleagues and for the superintendent, I think we have a choice point here. We're right up at 6, and I know we're going to lose 2 of our 6 board members. We will, at 6, I think Mr. Craig and Ms. Jones have to head out. We will have a quorum, I think, if I counted correctly, of 4. And I think we could decide either to return to foreign language at next month's Student Achievement Committee of the Whole, or we could choose to continue with that this evening. And I think it's whatever the majority would like to do.
And if I could also interject, board president, we are perfectly fine also with waiting until next month if that's the will of the board.
So do we have preferences from, just hear from everybody? I'm going to start this way from Dr. Moffitt, and then we'll come down.
Oh, I feel so special. I would love for us to leave, but then maybe add this, if we could, to maybe the board meeting so we don't have to talk about this in a whole month. Put this at the next business meeting.
Other perspectives from Ms. Bolton and Mrs. Weinberg?
We can stay, we can do it later. I don't care.
Okay, I think we should then do with what Dr. Moffitt suggested, absent any other criticism. We can pick it up sooner than a month from now, but also let folks head out at 6. on time tonight. So thank you. Having no other discussion items before us, I'll declare our committee meeting adjourned.